get started here. We are recording the interview of Navy veteran Jordan Zimmerman. This interview is being conducted by Jeremy Tack from the Wright State University's Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at Wright State University in the New Media Incubator. It is 3:30 p.m. on October 20th, 2017. Jordan, welcome to Wright State.
Yeah,
how are you doing?
Thanks. I'm doing great.
Awesome. So let's start off. Tell me, where and when were you born?
I was born July 10th, 1987, Dayton, Ohio.
Who were your parents and what were their occupations?
So my dad's name is Tom Zimmerman. He worked at a company called 2J Supply Company, which is a heating and air supplier in Dayton. And he actually got hired the year I was born, I believe, and he just retired. So my whole life, that's where he's worked.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom, she is a stay-at-home mom. My parents got divorced when I was in high school, and so, yeah, where am I going with this? She's done like a lot of volunteer work her life. She's volunteered at like the local park district in Churchill. That's what I remember the most growing up, was her being a volunteer. So yeah.
Do you have any siblings?
I have two brothers. I'm in the middle. I have a younger brother named Jacob and an older brother named Josh.
All J's.
Yeah.
Do you have any family that served in the military?
So my grandfather was a CB during World War II. And it's very kind of well known in my family. It's talked about a lot, the stories. I never got to meet him. He passed away before my parents even met, in the 70s, I think. But the stories were always there. And so he was born here in Ohio, and I guess he sort of saw the writing on the wall, and it was said to him that, the war, obviously Pearl Harbor and everything, and he didn't want to be drafted. And so he was a little bit older, and he decided to just go. He had some connections at the base. He kind of helped build, actually, Wright Pat, and was head of civil engineering after the war. But he had a huge impact on Wright Pat. But through that, he had connections and was able to get his CB, which was brand new, as I understand it at the time. The construction battalions were as in that designator was just started. So, but yeah, he was a CB in World War II, and I think he did serve for a few years, and then, he was always in the reserves, but he served as an officer for a few years after the war. He did some time at the Pentagon. And then my uncle, or my great uncle, I was kind of just referred to him as my uncle, Michael Jim, my grandmother. So Grandpa was just talking about his wife, her brother, my Uncle Jim, he served in the Army in occupied Japan. And you know what? I did know him. He passed away when I was just out of high school, but I knew him really well. And I do remember some stories, but I never really got to ask him what it was like to be in occupied Japan. I don't think honestly, throughout the time that he was living in my life, that ever meant much to me. But now I'm it's a pretty unique time in history. And so, and then there are other people. On my mom's side, my great uncle as well, my grandma's brother, he was in the Navy, but I don't have very many memories of that. He had tattoos, which were always really cool to see, but it wasn't really talked about quite a bit. So, yeah, unfortunately, I never asked him any of his stories or anything. He's passed away as well, but he was in the Navy. And then my younger brother joined the Navy shortly after I did, maybe a year or so.
So what did you do before joining the service?
Well, let's see here. I graduated high school, and as I was preparing to graduate, there was a group of us, a close friend of mine, he was like really dead set on joining the Air Force. And that was my intentions too. But instead I just decided that, you know what, I'm gonna go to school. And I worked when I was in high school, I worked at Fazoli's, the restaurant chain. And then I worked as a bank teller, I worked at FedEx. And I was a student. I was like going to Sinclair at the time, aspiring to be a nurse, which is interesting because it's what I'm finishing up on now. That's like a 10-year process because that's like 2007. But yeah, that's what I was doing before. I guess I was doing something. I wasn't like a total bum, but that's what I was doing before I joined the Navy.
So you joined the Navy. Why the Navy?
So, gosh, I don't know if I should say this. I had like a close friend who is you, who, I don't know if that's too much like behind the scenes information there. There was a little bias in the interview, I guess. But who was like, I have to say, like I was going through a time in my life of like a lot of indecision, and I just didn't know if like, gosh, I don't want to say I was bored going to school, but it just kind of felt like, where's the experience? Like I'm going to leave school, and even though I was going to school for healthcare, for nursing, and I realized that in a sense that's a trade. So, I mean, you learn a trade and you get hired because you have skills, but I still looked at it as like, who's going to want to hire me? I mean, like I have no experience, and like, what kind of story is this going to be? Just stuck here in Ohio my whole life. So I was like, why not do something cool? And I had a friend who basically would call me like every week and tell me like what he was doing and where he was at and like what cool stuff he was doing and seeing. And I was like, man, that is totally awesome. And so I remember just like, again, so I almost joined the Air Force, and I went through the whole process of doing that. I went to MEPS and I did the processing, and I failed a drug test when I was trying to get into the Air Force, and it wasn't honestly that much of a roadblock, I don't think, or as I thought it would be. I think it was more on, I'm really trying to remember now the details, but it was like on the recruiting level, and my recruiter probably could have brushed it aside. But I remember just thinking like, this is over, I'm done. And so when I sought out to like, that was me after high school, and I was like, I just kind of walked away from it. And so when I decided to pursue this again, it clicked. I was like, the Navy is so much better than every other branch. I honestly like just inherently felt like, wow, like there's a family connection. My grandfather was in the Navy, and it just seemed more of my personality. And I still feel that way. A lot of people who knew me, or know me still obviously, but like knew me when I told them that I was joining the military, and knew me as I was growing up, they were like, really? Because and still am like decently liberal, and was kind of always against the idea of, well, not against the idea of war, but the military would have been the last thing that I think many people would have thought I would have done and been successful at. And so this is all a long story. I was like, I didn't tell anybody. I went through everything, the whole in processing, without telling anyone, I think, except for my good friend, you, and my younger brother. I told him because I think that made me commit to it more. I think was that like, I'm gonna do this, and I'm not gonna have anybody talk me out of it, and I'm also not gonna have this sort of like pressure in any way. I want this to be my decision, and so yeah, I joined the Navy.
And I remember that phone call. I was stationed in Bahrain at the time, and we would talk occasionally, and you were one particular time just kept asking me questions about the Navy. I was like, I think he's thinking about joining the Navy. So
yeah, I remember even being at MEPS, like the day I processed, like Not before I shipped out to boot camp, but when I was processing to sign all the paperwork. And yeah, I called you and you were somewhere new, and I was like, man, this is so cool. I want to be in the Navy and see the world.
So you join the Navy and you go to boot camp. Where is boot camp and what was that like?
Let me tell one more story.
Go ahead.
So like because I'm like realizing this now, I also like really, really wanted to do healthcare. And I remember when I went back and decided to sign up again, like the recruiting station, I'm sure they're still this way. The exact recruiting station that I signed up in Heber Heights, I think is no longer in the same place that it was. But like where the building is like all all the service. I don't think the Coast Guard was there, but all the services are there. And so when you walk in, it's just this like, like what's the word? Like wolf's den. They're all like, fangs out, like fresh meat. And I remember going into the Marines like recruiting station, and honestly, I have no idea why I did that, because I don't think that I wanted to join the Marines per se. I just walked in, I said, I want to do medical. And the guy was like, you need to go over to that. Like, he didn't even hesitate. He's like, oh, why don't you go over to and talk to the Navy, and I'll see you in a couple of years, basically. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I still didn't even know what that meant. I was like, what? Like, why wouldn't he be interested in me? But then I went and did a lot of research and found out there's this position called hospital corpsman, and like the history of that. And I'm not like super uber like military. I don't see myself as being like very gung-ho military and super motivated before I joined the military, at least. And I was like, this is what I want to do, like to help people and to have like be a part of that organization with like that history and like the selflessness. And I remember going to MEPS, and the guy, he was probably lying to me, but he was like, oh, we can't get you a spot as a corpsman. You're gonna have to pick something else. And I was like, all right. And I was like, I'm gonna go home. I was like, thanks. I was like, I got up and walked out of his office, and he's like, or went to walk out of his office, and he's like, whoa, stop. He's like, I hold on. And like, he pretended that it was this great ordeal he had to go through to get me a position. But that was key too. Like, I didn't want to join the military if I couldn't do something medical related. And at that point, it was, if I couldn't be a corpsman, I didn't want to join the military. Anyway, sorry.
So they guaranteed you that you could be a corpsman?
Yeah.
So you went to boot camp. Tell me about that.
So boot camp's at Great Lakes. And I mean, even though we're not that far from Great Lakes, you fly in and you're there at the O'Hare National Airport. And I don't know, I think that when I'm really anxious and like nervous about something, I approach the situation with humor. And so I remember like not necessarily taking it serious. And even when they picked us up from the airport, like thinking like, what in the world? Because they're like, in the airport, they're fairly docile, I think, because like there's not much they can actually do to you in front of people. And so they were, I was like thinking like, this is so weird. And then showing up to getting there in the building, and then immediately they would just be in your face screaming and yelling at you. You're lined up in this hall, and then that whole first night processing through. And I remember I had a friend who, we were in MEPS together, and I don't know the term, there's like a little unit that you're a part of before you go to boot camp. There's a term for it, but we were in that together. And so we bonded because we had the same like ship date, like we were going to leave on the same day. And so we were like, let's stick together. We're going to try to stay together through boot camp. Obviously not realizing how that works. I think just being fairly naive about it. And like, I guess just like if you stayed close together, then, you're going to like end up in the same group through boot camp. And I remember you show up, and one of the first nights, like, I don't think you sleep actually, or very little, but they have you in process, and you turn all your stuff into them, and they issue all your gear, and you're going through a bunch of paperwork. And the medical stuff doesn't start that night, but you do have to give like a urine sample, and it's this like big room with like all these urinals, like just like 20 of them, if not probably more, and you're supposed to go in, and they have like, you know, super like whatever, drill instructors, whatever, petty officers in there when you're doing it. But if you can't, you're supposed to just be able to walk in and pee in a cup. But if you can't do that, you have to like walk in circles around and around and around. And so I got separated from this guy during that. And I remember I saw him one more time at boot camp, just randomly in the hallway, and then literally never again have I seen this guy. But I remember that night, I was like, when they finally brought us back to our barracks or our berthing, just being like, we were put in these little like really small like racks, and just thinking like, man, I made a huge mistake. Like I'm gonna walk home. This is like, I'm gonna ask to go home and leave this place, and just being like, this was like a huge mistake. Yeah, but then like, I don't know, I think I realized like that boot camp is just like a big game in a way, you know, like it's just a mind game that they try to break you and make you, I don't know, like boot camp's about like a general policy that like will just put this kind of fear into you, and like most of you are just going to comply with it and conform to our standards. The rest of you, we're going to get you later, more or less. Like, but yeah, so.
Do you remember any of your instructors?
Gosh, yeah, but I'm like, you kind of put me on the spot now. Like, I'm really having a hard time remembering their names, though. I remember there was one guy who was like, the way they had it set up is there were like 2 divisions, obviously, and I was in an integrated division, which that was like a unique experience too. And a lot of people were like really envious of us because like we had girls. We were like, I mean, honestly, fairly constantly around the other division, which was female, and they were like, everyone would be like so jealous of us, like, oh, you guys are so lucky, but we were like, I remember being in an integrated division with females, like, it was like, no. Like, because we would get beat, as they call it, or IT'd, or like worked out. I feel more than other divisions would, because I think the instructors were like terrified of getting in trouble for a fraternization or something, or at least like didn't ever want to have that situation where like, because I mean, you know, there's a huge liability of somebody does something crazy, that it's going to come down on them. So if we even like looked at the female recruits, we would get like IT'd, you know, worked out or whatever. And so, but there was, so because of, I don't know if because of that, I had female instructors as well. I don't know if, I think the all male divisions would have female instructors as well. But I remember, gosh, it's really a shame I don't remember their names. But there was kind of a shorter guy who, I don't know why I felt this way, but I did. I felt that he kind of liked me, and like, you know, like didn't necessarily take me under his wing, but I remember distinctly there was a time where we had like weapons training, and the first day in the Navy boot camp, you shoot a shotgun and then you shoot the M9. You don't ever shoot like a rifle. And it's really very brief. You don't do it for, it's like 2 days, I think, total, or 3, where you have one day where it's just simulated training, and most of it's just in the classroom. And then they do have some, I think maybe you do handle like sim weapons. And then the next day you go back and you do live fire. Again, you do actually qualify for the handgun, the M9, right? Mm-hmm. And then you, I think it's so kind of stupid. Like they just have you shoot the shotgun once, I think, to see what it's like to shoot a shotgun, I think. I don't know. But I remember that day that we had like the simulated training. I remember like they were like, if you even close your eyes or have the hint of falling asleep, like we're gonna kick you out, and then you have to come repeat this or something like that. And I remember like, I guess I must have closed my eyes or something, and they were like, get out of here, and I had to like go out in the front of this building that they were doing the training and clean these like, what was it? Like, they were like glass cabinets or whatever, display cabinets. They had like model ships in them apparently, and I had to clean those like all day. And when my instructor came, he like, I remember him just being like, "You idiot," and so I was like, I was like, man, I'm gonna get killed for this. Like, but he brought me back to the ship, and he's like, drop, like he went to like, just like go through the routine. At this point, I'd been in boot camp for a while too. Like, I was like, oh, this is gonna be, hell. And then he's like, so I did like, I think it was like push-ups or whatever, burpees or something. And I did one. He's like, stop, and he's like, all right, just go back to the division. I was like, really? Like, just he let me off easy, and I made like the fatal mistake of telling some of my friends about that. And oh man, he like totally let me have it. So, and then I remember we had this chief who like, would just like tell us that he hated us and like, just, I don't know, that he just didn't seem to want to be in boot camp anymore as I think back on it. And he would walk around with this like, I don't know what it was, some sort of like staff in a way. I don't know if it was used for a drill or something, but he would just walk around and like hit the ground with it. Like he was just like it was a cane or something. And I remember one day he accidentally like just smashed this kid's hand with it. And I remember like thinking, like, it's like seeing like the look of fear in his face, like he was gonna, he was gonna get in a lot of trouble for it. But yeah, that was my instructors.
So after boot camp, did you go on the training after this?
Yeah, I spent like a long time in training. I went across the street to core school. Like, it was still in Great Lakes at that time. I think it's in Texas now. Hospital Corpsman School, or A school, and then, well, that's like, I'm realizing now, like, I'm glad I told some of the story, because so I had a drug waiver, because I don't know if like I overdid this, but I remember thinking like, if I ever get caught lying to them, they're gonna like bust me and kick me out, and they tell you all these stories about like fines, federal, whatever, if you get caught lying. So I remember thinking like, when I went to join the Navy, like, I have to disclose to them that I've smoked marijuana before. And so they knew this, and I had a waiver. So when I told them about this in MEPS or whatever, I realized now it was like, there was no big deal. I probably should have just kept my mouth shut. But because I had this waiver, when I went to pick orders after A school, they said to us that they said, when you go to pick orders, if you have a drug waiver, you can't go overseas. And I honestly don't know if that was actually true or not. But I remember thinking, like, they said that your first duty station couldn't be overseas. And so I thought to myself, I remember them saying something about C schools, and how my group, by the luck of the draw, had like the opportunity to for a lot of C school slots. And I remember basically like the wheels started turning, like, well, if I go to a C school, that'll be considered a first command, and then I can go overseas. And a C school is not very long; it's like 6 months. And I was like, that's like nothing in the grand scheme. So, as opposed to like spending 2 or 3 years at some stateside command in some, remote place that no one wants to be. And I wanted to see some country, and so that was like a huge factor. I picked to be a preventive medicine technician as a C school, a PMT. And that also we were told, well, I asked like which one of these C schools do you like walk away with the most college credit, and they were like PMT, and so of the ones at least that we were being offered. I don't know if that's true for all of every C school, but and so I was like, yeah, let me do it, and that's where I met like would become like my closest friends in the military. Because we followed after A school, we went to San Diego, which is where the C school was, and that was another reason why I was like, man, this is going to be awesome because I get to go to San Diego for, however long, 6 months, but, I met like my good, like really close friends, like Buddy Reischauer from New York and my friend Mordine from St. Louis and Valerio and Neil from California and Colorado. But so I spent like 6 months there in San Diego, and then after that, when it was time to pick orders, I picked like 3rd Medical Battalion in Japan because I had a friend who was stationed there, and at the time, and he was honestly hadn't been there very long. He was one of my friends from Corps School, Zep, and he loved it. He's like, this is awesome. Japan is so cool. Like, it's like an island, so I get to go out and surf every day or in the ocean, and I was like, oh man. He's like, I remember talking to him all through Facebook and how awesome it was. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go to Okinawa. And I remember the day I picked the orders to Okinawa, like, and I'm not sure I had the opportunity to tell him that I was gonna go there. I'm not sure he knew, because like, it just so happened that like I picked the orders and I go back to my room and I'm like on Facebook or whatever, and he sends me a message. He's like, it sucks here, don't come. Like they had just like imposed like all these restrictions on him, because Okinawa is like, it's a very interesting duty station. So I remember like emailing him back and saying like, why didn't you tell me this? Like, it's too late now. I'm gonna have to go to Okinawa. And he's like, oh man. He's like, I think he tried to like make it a little rosier, because he's like, probably realizing, like, well, I've just convinced this guy to go to Okinawa, and like now I'm like, telling him it's horrible. So like, not try to crush him too much. And then, but so in order to do that though, it was a Marine billet. It was like with a Marine unit. So I had to go to field medical school, FMTB in Camp Pendleton, California. So I feel like relatively speaking, from a lot of people I've talked to, or just in general, I spent a long time in training. I spent like at least, over the first year of being in the military. I was in some sort of school, and yeah.
So during this time, how was it adapting to military life?
Well, gosh, I remember when I was sort of growing up and in high school, like people saying, you gotta go to college, and you gotta go away to college. Like, college essentially is not, you don't get the full effect unless you go away. If you just stay locally, because I went, like I said, I went to Sinclair, like a community college, which I love, but it did never truly feel like that college experience of being away and trying to figure out, just life and being in a dorm or whatever. And so, that was that. I think that I had that feeling being in the military of independence and of being away and sort of being able to have to figure out stuff on your own, essentially. And so like that was a change. And then like, I don't think the military instilled in, well, I'm not trying to sound I don't think the military instilled stuff in me so much as like uncovered stuff that was already there, like all like potentials that were there, to be really driven and motivated, was uncovered in the first couple of years of being in the military that I don't think I ever knew was there. And I like remember thinking very early on, like knowing without a shred of doubt that this was going to be what I wanted to do the rest of my life, was be in the military. And not to jump around too much, but like I still feel that way. I mean, even though I'm a veteran now, surprise, I got out. Spoiler alert. But I love the military. I mean, I still tell everyone. I see young people, like out of high school that are just like putzing around. I'm like desperately want to be like, go. I do tell them, but like almost like force them, like especially young guys. I think, not that I mean girls too, but like young guys that just like don't feel like they're going anywhere in their life. Like, go join the military. Like, do something, and it's fun, man. Like the stories and like the worst times are like the best times in the military. It's like whenever you have it easy, you never remember it. But like the times that are really, really tough, like you form memories and friendships that like, even if, I don't know, to say they last a lifetime, I don't know about that, but they really leave an impression on you and I think make you, a better person overall.
So after all this training you got through almost over a year now, you finally get to Okinawa. What was Okinawa like?
Well, I remember walking off the plane and just like hitting a wall of just the humidity is insane. And I'm sure that there are certainly people who are going to watch this who experience like really crazy weather and environments and humidity. But I can say that like locally, when people in Dayton, Ohio, when people complain about like, oh, it's really humid today, you have no idea like what like true 100% humidity is like. And so I remember flying over the island and just like realizing like how small it was and like just seeing it's just tropical, and then like walking off the island or the plane and just being like hitting a wall, like that's how the humidity was. And then realizing, so like Okinawa, Japan is a very interesting duty station, especially for your first duty station, because you're away from home and you're kind of bored too, because it's there as a contingency for, well, it's there strategically in that AOR and that Pacific, for as like, but essentially we're still there in case something happens with North Korea or China, I guess. But my point is that, well, and gosh, this is like super relevant, but like nothing has happened with North Korea since the 50s, right? Since the end of the war. And so you do a lot of training and you do a lot of small deployments, but they're really just exercises or operations in that area in the Pacific. But you're not really doing a lot. And, you have to understand that this was 2009, 2010. And so the war in Iraq and Afghanistan is still going on. And it's not, certainly not at its height, during the troop surges in 2004 or whenever that was. But a lot of my friends, went straight from Corps School to FMTB and then to overseas, to Afghanistan or Iraq. And also you have to understand that when I think things were starting to die down. So I remember when I found out I was going to Okinawa, and some of the more senior, on base where I was at in Camp Pendleton, a lot of the guys that were stationed there, the other corpsmen, would say like, you're going to go to Afghanistan. They're going to augment you to Afghanistan, and you're a PMT, which is like a highly deployable billet. And so a lot of people had that mindset going there, and so I think there's a lot of like just stir craziness, and so because of that, the Marines are not really the best ambassadors to America. They can get in a lot of trouble out in town, I guess, and so they would, and then we would be on like lockdown on the base, and so yeah, and the locals there. I mean, so, I hate to say this. I mean, I don't want to like overgeneralize and stereotype this whole island, because at the time I was really, really, really ready to leave Okinawa almost from the get-go, and it was not I remember thinking like this is not an experience that I ever want to go through again. But I now think back and like it was probably some of the best time that I ever in the military because of how close we all got there and having to spend like, you know, so much time together on base, but like also when you're stateside, you know, you can go fly home or drive home and see your family, and it's like, or friends and home for holidays. But it's like, I remember I got to go home once. I took leave after 1 year being there. I took leave for a month, and I flew home, and it was like a $2,000-$2,500 flight, and so it was like, yeah, I was like, I mean, you're stuck on this island for 2 years, which I understand that there's definitely worse places to be in the world, but I think for those that have been to Okinawa, they know like it's also very, it's a place that sticks with you, I think, for a long, long time.
So what'd you do for fun in Okinawa?
Drink. I mean, yeah, there's history on the island. I mean, I'm like a huge history buff, so they have like the tunnels that they had built, the Japanese had built during the war. And not to go on some like tangent about Okinawan history, but the Okinawan people are also like very unique in that they're Japanese, but they're very strong in their heritage and culture, and they are considering themselves Okinawan before Japanese, and they have their own history outside of Japan. It's kind of like, I always equated it to, and I don't know if this is dead on or not, but like Hawaiians are obviously U.S. citizens as well, but they have probably almost consider themselves to be Hawaiian before a U.S. citizen, or Puerto Rican too. Like they have a very strong cultural background that they identify with, and so that's how Okinawans are. And so when the Japanese essentially invaded them before they invaded them during the war, and so there's a lot of a history there, and you can see like remnants of the war and old like Japanese like or Okinawan castles and stuff. And so I would go and see that, and then I like scuba certified, and like the corals and like the ocean around, like the water is like amazing, and the fish and like the coral and just that like that ocean ecosystem is like just amazing. I remember thinking like like this is like watching like a National Geographic documentary about just like being in the ocean and seeing all that. But also like, yeah, a big part of it was just going out and wasting time. There's this little area outside of the base I was at, Camp Hansen, that was called Kintown, and they had really good food, and so we'd go out there and eat, and then they had like a lot of bars. It was like, it's also very much like the Wild West in the sense of like, I always tell my dad stories about it, like when you'd love to hear him, like you'd go out and these Marines are like, it's a bars full of Marines, and so like the fighting and just, oh man. But so yeah, pretty much. And then also like I remember really getting into like going to the gym and stuff while I was there, and going to the pool and going to the track, and because you're stuck on base for a lot of the time. And I had like I'd had the internet and I had a smartphone, and so but I mean, a lot of times there wasn't really a lot of ways to spend your time other than sit around and wait to leave.
Did you deploy at all from Okinawa?
I mean, I went. So I went to Thailand. There was like, this would have been in 2010. Yeah, no, 2011. Because I was there from 2010, 11, and 12. And I went to Thailand. There was flooding, and there was like a disaster relief. And I remember going on, it was a ship, the USS Tortuga. We went to Thailand, and so that was interesting. The only time I've ever been on, the only time in my 7 years of being in the Navy that I was ever on a ship. It was like for a month-ish when we went to Thailand. And but yeah, I remember showing up and them saying that, well, and that's when I learned like that when there is some disaster in the world, or humanitarian crisis, like, and I'm not sure how widespread this belief is, but I think a lot of people might say like, well, why don't we do something to help these people? Like how hard it really is to actually cross that line and to get like assistance to. I know a lot of countries are like hesitant to actually allow us to assist them, and there's a lot of like diplomacy and bureaucracy and politics that go into that. And so I remember showing up, and then they were like, well, you're not going to be able to get off the ship. And I was like, what the heck? Like, why did we even come here then? And then they let us like do like a port call, but they weren't going to let us get off to do like humanitarian stuff. So, and then I remember just out of the blue one day, they're like, all right, yeah, like a small group of us, like a group of engineers of the Marines, and then like myself and a couple other, one or two other corpsmen. I was like the PMT assigned to go. We're going to get to go and go to these like really badly flooded areas, and the engineers were going to like help. I don't remember what they did, but yeah. And then I remember I was in Okinawa when the Fukushima plant, like the earthquake, and I remember that was like a big deal. That was like early on when I was there, and that was like a true lesson in how like a contingency force really works, and that so all of a sudden, well, I remember all of a sudden like my phone, because my friends from back home could still, my family could still text me, and they couldn't call me actually, but they could text me, and so just getting like my phone blown up, like, are you okay? Are you like, what's going on? Like what are you talking about? Like, yeah, it's fine, just a normal day. And then like slowly finding out that there was this earthquake in mainland Japan, and it was really bad, and that they didn't know if they were going to have us go respond to it, and then finding out there's this nuclear power plant that was damaged, and this huge crisis. And I remember they mustered us all that night, like at midnight, at our battalion, and then we spent like the whole night next day and like following week or whatever, preparing to send like a group over there. And they did, it went from like them saying, because it's just like anything in the military, the fluctuation of how that operation is going to work. It starts out really big, and then, or who knows, it starts out small and gets big and small again. And so I remember thinking that, being told that I would go with some of my other PMT friends, and then they ended up sending one of us to like a first class E6 who had a lot of experience. So I was there when that happened, and then I went to Cambodia and did it was like I'm sorry, I can't remember the name, but humanitarian medical assistance operation. We would go, a really small group of us, Marines and corpsmen. We went out. It was really it was a Marine operation, but more of the Navy in the sense that it was being run by medical officers because it was just a medical operation. We went out to this remote place in Cambodia and essentially set up, the forward deployed like medical unit and a wide range of medical services. I remember doing like cataract surgery on somebody in the field, assisting in that and doing all sorts of stuff. But that was really cool because like of all the stuff that I did when I was in Okinawa, that felt like it made the most impact, and I got to see the people that I was helping. Even when we were doing the disaster flood relief in Thailand, I obviously saw, the people of Thailand, but when we were doing the actual work, I never got to see anybody. The place was already evacuated or whatever. But that, obviously you get to have firsthand contact with people. And I remember like them saying also like just also really getting a perspective of what it's like to live in another country that's not as developed, or at least in an area of that country that's not as developed as the United States. And these people were like, there was a guy who was there in the village that we were at, I think honestly just by coincidence, who was there from the Peace Corps, and he acted like as our pseudo interpreter. And I remember him saying that these people asked him like, who are these people? Are they? Then him telling us that they don't really think that you're like them. They think you're some sort of like mutant giant, because we were like so much bigger than these people, and they were just like kind of in awe of, and like just curious as to like kind of, they've never seen anything like this, like a huge convoy of people come through that had all this equipment and everything. But yeah, so I did that, and then I also went to went to South Korea, and that was like a joint exercise that happens every year, and it coincides with their like the birthday of their leader or whatever. It's like their Independence Day, and they do. I mean, they always do, and that's why like I kind of tell people like this whole like North Korea stuff with Trump, like it is very different this time, I think. But I mean, this is stuff that's been going on for such a long time, where leading up to that, there had been like the what's his name, Kim Jong-un, or
Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, like he had sort of more recently took over as the leader, and Obama, this was was not brand new as a president, but still within his first term, and so it was like two new leaders, and what would happen in the situation, and like the North Koreans like bombed an island, they shelled an island and sunk a ship, and I remember training with North Korean ROK Marines, Republic of Korea Marines, and I remember these kids like they were like 19-year-old kids like saying like, we're going to war and I'm prepared to die and you should be prepared to die as well. Like, well, I don't know if I didn't get that memo. That's not why I came over here. Like, but I remember sort of thinking that like, this sort of is how it works then. Like, because I was so convinced that like something crazy would happen, and then like it didn't. And then the next year, even though I wasn't there, like following on the news, and this is just what happens, this cycle of aggression between the US and North Korea. And yeah, obviously stuff that Trump says is, Obama did not handle it like that. I mean, he handled it more traditional in the sense of, diplomacy, not to antagonize them. And, but I think otherwise, like, it's just status quo. So, but when I was in Korea, it was like the one thing I do remember. It was I've never been so cold in my life. Like I remember because we went there to train. Essentially, it was this big what my understanding is what it is just this huge joint operation training exercise, but it's a way of security in the sense of like, well, North Korea, you're threatening to do all this stuff. If you do, we already conveniently have all these people here. And then as a way of like showing them like, oh, you want to do your military exercises, we'll one up you and do ours too. But so that's all it was, is just like training. And but you go to this camp. It was called Camp Muchunk, and it was this Marine base, essentially a skeleton of a base, as in like very few organic, structures that are there, and it's just like open. You just go there and set up tents and stuff. And it was like in the middle of winter and freezing. And I remember that night, like, we had these like these generators in our tents, these like space heaters, and it went out. And I've never experienced before like people's teeth chattering in their sleep, and like guys like moaning. It was like the craziest thing ever. But anyway.
So you have quite a time in Okinawa, going on all these different deployments and experiences. What was next for you after Okinawa?
So I wanted to. I did want to. At that point, I did want to go back to the States, and I guess I was kind of homesick. Okinawa had probably definitely contributed to my decision to go to Great Lakes. That's where my brother was. So meanwhile, when I was in Japan, my younger brother decides to join the military, and he became a corpsman as well. And he is stationed at Great Lakes, and it's sort of the same. And that I had that my decision to join the military was influenced in part by you, my friend, who would call and tell me about all this great stuff you were doing all over the world. Well, after I think I had my taste of that, I was influenced by talking to my brother when I was in Okinawa, him saying, I'm in Great Lakes and this is what it's like, and I can go home every weekend. Like I can see, mom, dad, and I can go home easier than certainly I could, even if it wasn't every weekend. And I remember thinking, and then just like all the amenities and just life of being in the States, I was like, man, I want to go home. So I went to the Navy boot camp. I was a preventive medicine technician there at the clinic, the Great Lakes Tranquility, that's what it's called, health clinic there in boot camp. And my job, I found out when I got there, was to, when I, was in the preventive medicine department, and so we were sort of tasked with screening people for STIs, so hepatitis, chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, HIV, and then as well tuberculosis. That was obviously not related to STIs, but screening people for communicable diseases. And so we were part of that screening process, and then when the positives would come back, it was our job to educate these people, to counsel them on what their diagnosis was, and then how to sort of protect themselves in the future, and sort of what they needed to do as far as follow up, and then what services were available to them, and then just to make it known that, hey, if you in the future need preventive medicine, like if you find yourself with STI, then this is what you can do. And so that was my job I was there for 3 years. I was telling people that they have gonorrhea, which is pretty much it. And we would, like I said, we also did like the HIV screenings, and those obviously were not as common, although when I would tell some people, like, yeah, I mean, probably does make sense because you're just bringing in all sorts of people from all over the country, well, world too, but that some of those people are going to end up being HIV positive, and we would be involved with that too. And so that was obviously left an impression every time we would do one of those. And then also we would do like, health inspections on the base and boot camp, and that was interesting.
So that wasn't too far away from home. What was that like being that close to home?
I mean, it was. I always looked at it as a good thing. I mean, at that point I'd really missed my family, and so missed my. Well, I started my relationship with, well, sort of rekindled my relationship with my wife. So like that, then my now wife. So, and that was obviously a good thing to be able to go home and then see like my close friends, and it was just easier, obviously. And then I was in Chicago too, which also that was a big thing. It was like, I didn't necessarily feel that, because I knew that there's some. I am well aware that there are some duty stations stateside that you're not in a great place. It's like sort of the military sets up there, and there's nothing else. And I knew that obviously Chicago is not that like that. I mean, it's like, not that you're in the city, but you're really close to it, being stationed there. And like, there's obviously like San Diego, but there's not too many like big bases or military bases near like big cities like that. So, I mean, that was like awesome being able to see Chicago, and huge music fan. So like that's obviously, a big stop for every major band. So, and that was like something I'd really like kind of missed out on when I was in Japan, was being able to go to concerts and see music that I love. So, yeah, I mean, it was great. I loved being close to home.
Mm-hmm. And you had your brother there as
yeah.
well.
Oh, yeah. Also, I had my brother there, which was interesting because we did not work that far from each other. We were in the same building. He was in the next hall from me, and so I would oftentimes send recruits to see my brother. So it's interesting.
Did you ever deploy from Great Lakes?
Yeah, I went. I went the first pretty much year and a half, going on 2 years, with no deployment opportunities, and that was also something I expected to deploy to Great Lakes, and then all of a sudden, an opportunity to go to Afghanistan came up, and I'd gone through everything, there were times when I was in Okinawa where there was sort of the hints at going to Afghanistan, but it never transpired. It never came to anything. But this seemed more real. And so I did this whole workup and told everybody, and this whole emotional preparing to go to Afghanistan, and real preparing, and then it's, I guess what I was told is that they cut like the orders and the TO, so like I was dropped from that, and so I was like, honestly, I don't know if I would say disappointed, but just kind of like, it's as if like you're preparing for a big football game on Friday, and high school football game, and then you just, oh, it's canceled, you're not going to it anymore. Like, oh, like I was really prepared to do this. And then, so soon after that, they got orders for somebody to go to Guantanamo Bay. And so I think in part because I'd already prepared, already worked up the whole thing to go to Afghanistan, and it was certainly easier, and I'd been given clearance and everything. So my command was like, well, you're already like 90% ready. You're going to go to Gitmo. And so, yeah, I ended up deploying for 9 months to Guantanamo Bay Joint Medical Group, JMG, and that was very interesting. I spent time with, that was my deployment, was with the detainees. And so, again, doing like the public health side of that. So these guys some of them had tuberculosis or had been treated for, at that time, been long treated for tuberculosis. And so we sort of followed up with that program, just making sure that there wasn't anyone that still needed to be screened or that needed to have anything related to TB. And then health inspections for the camp. So like going in and seeing like all the different parts of Guantanamo Bay, like the detainee areas, because there are parts that are the more traditional. Well, you would assume like a maximum security prison, and then there are the other parts that are like for detainees with more privileges, and so they're like trailers that they live in, and so those guys are that would be the harder part of preventive medicine wise of because those guys are allowed to do whatever not whatever, but allowed to have essentially a lot more freedom, and so they can cook and have food, and they had like some really big affinity for pigeons. There were pigeons near the base, so like this one guy like had like this whole like collection of pigeons that he had got to come live near his hooch or whatever, his little trailer. And so like that was a huge part of the time that I was there, was dealing with that, because like there's birds carried all sorts of disease and they're like pooping all over the place. But yeah, I mean it was interesting. Obviously it was hard for and the reasons of, again, like going back to being in Okinawa, like you're away from your family and friends and everything. And actually in Okinawa we had much better means of communication. So like cell phones, and even though I could never call home, I still had to use like a payphone or something, use more of a landline to call home. But in Okinawa, but I mean I had like blazing fast internet in Japan, whereas like in Okinawa or in Guantanamo in Cuba, the internet is like non-existent. And this is like 2014, so it's a huge big deal when you don't have the internet. I know that sounds like petty, and it is, I'm sure, to people that get stationed in far worse situations, but I mean it just means that it's that much harder to, it means that you kind of sort of are closer to a real deployment, in the sense that you're not able to talk to your family and stuff, friends and loved ones. So and then otherwise, I mean, it's like, again, back to being on a base for the whole time. I mean, never. I mean, I was there when Obama reopened relations with Cuba. I remember sitting in like the chow hall and watching the news as that actually happened, like thinking like, wow, like this is historic, and here I am. Like also thinking like how awesome it would be to go and see Cuba. I was always like really, really, really fascinated with the history of the base, and with Cuba itself. And I remember take every opportunity I could. There's a place you could go, like the highest point of the island, or of the base. You could go out there, and if you looked, you could see like the villages that were Cuba. And we're doing that like as often as I could, and just to see Cuba, and then going down to the gate that is pretty famous, but like between the United States and where Cuba is, and seeing like the one lone like guy, and like still looking like 1950s like communist like uniform or whatever, like olive drab or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I wish I could have been there. I would definitely love to. I will intend to go to Cuba and see what that's like. But I was also there when I first got there was when they started doing like the detainee swaps, or like when they did the whole, it's in the news now, like the whole Berdahl whatever swap. And I actually knew the guy that was like really close to the guy that was there and did like was the corpsman assigned to be with those detainees and to travel. I don't remember, some Middle Eastern country that they went to, maybe Jordan, I don't know, but that they then met with that, you know, it was a super secret, you know, mission or whatever. But so that my point though is that it was interesting to be in Cuba when it was such a hot, controversial. I feel like Cuba has kind of fallen to the wayside in a way, and that was interesting too, being in Guantanamo, because that was where like I had sort of mixed feelings before I joined the military about Guantanamo Bay, and sort of never, I mean, obviously never agreed with like, you know, when the whole torturing thing happened. I know that was never a Gitmo, but that was like, what's the name of that? Abu
Ghraib.
Yeah, Abu Ghraib. Like, I remember, you know, obviously not agreeing with that, but just being very like confused as to why we had these and what purpose they served, and you know, whether or not whether or not it hurts our credibility to have places like this that we just are keeping people indefinitely. And so I remember when Obama got elected, him kind of running on a campaign of closing Guantanamo, and I remember kind of believing that, and so then to be there so many years after. I mean, I was there 2014, so very near the end of Obama's term, and like wow, like here we are, like nothing has changed, and we still have Guantanamo Bay, and I'm not sure. Well, Trump has ran on like that he wants to do more of torturing or whatever, but I mean, like, regardless of that, of Trump's stance on Guantanamo, it's like we don't even talk about it. Like, you know, it's this like, yeah, it's just, and that's the big thing that I felt like was unique, was like all of a sudden here I am on Guantanamo, and it's like Guantanamo Bay, and it's like all over the news, and which made it very interesting, because it's like I'm not sure this is totally unique to this deployment experience. I mean, maybe guys that are in Afghanistan and Iraq get to turn on the news and watch like reporters talk about them, but I know for me, like, that happened a lot in Gitmo. It was like you would turn on the news and like they were talking about, and that's where like both sides, it would be like, you know, both the right and the left, like sometimes the left, they would talk about stuff in Guantanamo, like that's not true at all. Like, I'm here, like I know that's not true. Like even the little stuff they would show, like stock footage of Gitmo, like as they were telling our story in 2014, and this is stuff from like 2002. Like, this is not at all what it's like here at all. I mean, so anyway.
So after Gitmo, it was back to Great Lakes.
Yeah. So I was like, then I basically finished my well, at that point, I was coming to the end of my current enlistment. I enlisted again when I was in Okinawa, but that was like in the middle of a current enlistment, so I'd added 3 years onto my contract or whatever, and it was like, you know, coming to a decision of whether or not I wanted to stay in, or I think I had like another 6 months-ish, less than a year. Yeah, 8 months maybe, left on my contract. You're like, should I re-enlist? Should I stay? And that's why I made a decision that, wanted to get out and start a new chapter and pursue something else. And another thing to that is I took advantage of something that I never did while I was up to that point. And that is a decent regret of mine, that while I was especially when I was in Okinawa, I never took advantage of going to school and using my tuition assistance, or just using the opportunity to take a few college classes here or there. But I started when I was in Great Lakes taking college classes at the local community college there, and then I took classes a great deal of. I took 4 classes when I was in Gitmo, online college classes, and so I just remember thinking it occurred to me I want to go to school and pursue that full time, which is what I'm doing now. And so I spent a little more time still left in the military after I got back from Gitmo, although it sort of feels like the two of them, especially as more and more time progresses on, it feels like those two of those are sort of closer, where pretty much Gitmo is the end of my military experience.
So how has your military experience affected your life now? What kind of changes maybe has it made, or your opinions on life or war?
Well, I remember again being told by a lot of different people that it would greatly impact who I am, and maybe it has. And I'm just not aware of it. But I still don't think that I still think that I'm the same person that I was before, in the sense of I feel strongly the way I do about certain things, and I'm not just some really gung ho or brainwashed uber patriot about the military. I love the military, but I think also that a lot of people don't misunderstand that. The military is there to serve a purpose, and it's still the public's decision. The public needs to be the ones that ultimately really consider where they're sending the military, and what job they want the military to do. And so I don't know, I sort of still feel that way now. But there is, I don't know what I'm really trying to say, but otherwise, I am a very motivated, driven person, I think, and part of that, I think, it has been brought out by the military. And what else? Currently I pretty much started going back to school as soon. I was still I think I was on terminal leave for a week still when I started classes, and so I didn't want to skip a beat. I was I want to get out and start going to school right away, and use my GI Bill and get a degree. And ironically, or not ironically, but again, ended up going back to Sinclair, and really because that was the fastest way to me to attain my goal of becoming a nurse, was why I picked that school again. But I would tell every single veteran that they need to, or person just choosing to get out of the military, or contemplating that they need to use their GI Bill, because it's not the easiest thing to navigate, but it certainly is. You need to take advantage of it, because you have a lot of skills, and I think that I do sort of feel that if you're an employer out there and you are thinking twice about hiring a veteran or whatever, that we are some of the most motivated people, and we're used to sometimes also really crappy situations, or situations in which there isn't a lot of reason why. You just kind of need to go through the motions and do something, and we're, I don't know. Military people, I think veterans, we do question stuff, but I think we also understand sometimes that there doesn't have to be a really great reason why. Sometimes you just need to do things just because it's the right thing to do or whatever. So.
Mm-hmm. So what message would you leave for future generations watching this interview?
Well, I mean, I love my time in the military, and I don't think that, I've talked to some people who think that, you know, we should sort of like what's it called? Conscription, where like we're sort of made to join the military for a few years after high school, whatever. And I don't agree with that. I think that it still is a personal decision, because that's a part of it, is like knowing that you made this decision and that you own this choice, and that you're doing something like, I'm doing this, like this is me. But as far as like what I would want people to take away from this is that, you know, the military is an awesome way to get somewhere in life, and to make something of yourself, and to just have really cool experiences, and to meet friends that, you know, you would never have the opportunity to before, and to do stuff that you would never have the opportunity to without the military. And also like to really take advantage of what the military can offer you. I mean, don't wait for don't wait for that opportunity to come to you. Seize that opportunity. And whatever I did in the military, I always fought for, you know, that next position. And I was an E5 when I got out, but I got to be an E5, I think, pretty fast within 3 years of being in the military. And I think in part it was because, you know, I always looked to strive to get in that next higher position, or to take on that responsibility. And
All right, well, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I mean, thanks for interviewing me, and this is awesome, man.
All right, well, I got one last question for you. If you were a prescription drug, what would you be and why?
If I feel if I was a prescription drug, I would probably be maybe like Ambien or hydroxyzine, which like drugs that are supposed to mellow you out in a way. Like, I don't know, maybe Ambien's a little too strong. I work in a pharmacy now, so that's an interesting question. Those are cooler drugs, I think, like Xanax or like.
All right, well, thank you, Jordan, for sharing your story with us, and thank you for your service.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Yep. All right, sweet.
Sweet.
That was it.
Awesome. Oh man, I wish I would have.